Shit.
Yeah, I don't even know why people use this. Yeah, the guy who runs it, you don't even want to meet him. Cool, Logstash. So how many people here have run Logstash in production?
Raise your hand. Finally, yes.
Yeah. How many people have played with it on their desktop or screwed around with it? Awesome. Who's written a custom grok expression for a log file they hate? All right. For a log file they love? Probably no one. Okay. No one loves log files that need grokking. Cool. So this is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of half intro, and I want to leave it open. At the end, if you guys have custom logs you need help grokking with or want to grok, I'd love to do that now, live.
We can grok together.
We can grok together. Yeah. Or any others. So at the end, think of anything you might need help with. Mic's not on. I would turn it on if I could. Is it on now?
Yeah.
Hey, cool. So yeah, if you have custom logs, pop in on IRC and we'll take a look later. Cool. And in general, the IRC channel is a good place to be. Lots of helpful, smart people there. So Logstash is a big pipe, right? Things come in, things get filtered, things go out. Internally, everything in Logstash is represented as an event. And I think that understanding the event lifecycle can help understand how everything flows. So obviously inputs generate events. Every event has a type for filtering later and optionally tags. So here's an example. This is my generic testing Logstash stuff start config. It's as easy as it gets, right? Read from standard in, output to standard out, show me what's happening. So we run this. Java starting. Okay. So this is a Logstash event. It looks pretty because we put debug in the output. So there's a source, a type, right? And the type was test we set in there. Now, let's say we want to do some more advanced filtering. Let's say we only want to see lines here that say Logstash in them, right? You can do something like, we'll add a grep filter. And I'll talk a little more about how this stuff works in a second. So we'll match on message, spelled correctly, for Logstash. We want to do this on anything that's type test. I mean, in this case, we only have one input that's type test, but you might have 15 inputs of different types. So this is how you can apply filters selectively to different inputs. And we'll add a tag. A tag, right? Now, before we add anything in the output, let's see if our filter works. So we go back here, type test, 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 Logstash, test. Right, and we'll see that, yep, the tag was added. Logstash is great. Now we type something that's not Logstash. Oh, well, let's tell the grep filter not to drop things. Right, so things that don't have Logstash in it don't get that tag. Things that have Logstash in it get that tag. Right, so this is the general way you can say, I have all these events coming in. I don't necessarily want to do the same thing to every event. Some events might go one place, another place, get filtered differently. So inputs, the most, in our case, standard in was reading one line and putting the text in. There are all different kinds of inputs from, like SNMP traps just got checked in. You can read from a file that's plain text. You can read from a file where each line is a JSON field. You can read from AMQP, you can read from an IRC channel. There's all sorts of inputs you can do. And each input acts a little bit differently, but the base is there's this message variable that gets populated with the raw input, a type and tags get set, maybe structured fields. So the filter chain, multiple filters, they're always guaranteed to run in order, one at a time, so you don't have to worry. So you can make a second filter that depends on the output from the first filter. And we'll see later that's really useful when we start doing things with grok. Filters can drop messages, so messages you don't want you can get rid of. Filters can actually combine messages with a multi-line filter. Some filters can generate extra messages with metrics. We'll look at that later. Shows you the tag thing, right? You can add, remove, mutate tags. And then outputs are exactly what they sound like. Events get to an output, and depending on the output, the event gets formatted and sent out to whatever that output is. And again, the output has all that type and tag filtering. So you can do all sorts of fancy, well, let's show that. So now let's see, how many times do I have this open? So let's see now, we only really want to see things with our tag. But now things that don't have Logstash in it don't get shown, right? So they're getting dropped. So the Logstash event, things to know about it. We're looking at a new event schema, but this is how it works for now. There are different attributes on a Logstash event. Anything that starts with an @ sign is metadata about the event. So they're kind of self-explanatory, right? And then fields are the arbitrary structured data. So if you log something in JSON and parse that, that'll show up in fields. If you log something in plain text and grok it out in regular expression and say this is the date, this is the XYZ, they'll all end up as fields. And depending on how other inputs work, they may pre-populate different kinds of fields.
Is that required? Like, can you strip out at source?
You can strip out at source. Things you wouldn't, because the mutate filter lets you pretty much do whatever you want, including shooting yourself in the foot. So you don't want to do things like take tag and types out unless you really know what you're doing.
Especially for the at source field, it's worthless. It was a bad idea.
Yeah, it's like a URI-ish thing most of the time, and
Sometimes
yeah. The new Logstash event schema is going to be much nicer. It's a little confusing now in the code and dealing with it because you see event foo and there's at foo, right? So you have a field name timestamp and a meta thing named at timestamp. So it's anything with at is internal. That's just what to remember. And things you really don't want to do is like if you're going to mutate at timestamp, don't use the date filter because Logstash makes assumptions about the stuff that's in metadata. If you suddenly make tags not an array, you're going to have a bad time. Yeah. Should have pizzaed. So generic cell unstructured logging in every Logstash doc. Log structured, right? This is a really bad log. It looks nice because, humans can read it. It all makes sense. It sucks for parsing. It sucks for grepping. It's not fun, right? Structured logging. And we'll see later after we grok this, right? So a lot of people have the issue where, like, how do you sell this to your developers, right? How do you just say log structured? They're not going to go, great, we'll do it, So I'm going to show how grok works, and I think, like Jordan mentioned yesterday, if you're using grok, it's kind of a crutch. Sometimes you can't help it. You have a vendor appliance, third-party stuff you can't modify. You're going to have to use grok on their logs. Chances are your vendor isn't going to suddenly implement JSON logging. Maybe they will. Awesome. But grok's a great way to prototype what can be. So Apache logs. I'm sure everyone's dealt with Apache logs or other things equally horrible. Really sucks for command line ninjing. Everyone ends up with really bad regular expressions or one-liners they use to do things, and they still usually break because someone has a basic auth username with a space and screws up your awk fields, and not fun. But regular expressions can parse it just fine. But is it really easy? And it is with Logstash. So let's look at an example, right? So, grok expressions first. Grok is a collection of predefined, grok is a regular expression engine that comes with a bunch of predefined patterns. We're always trying to build those patterns. So if you end up building a custom pattern for software that isn't just in-house for you, like you build a pattern for a squid log or a firewall, please submit it back because other people will want it too. So the basic gist of it is you have the name of so let's look at a pattern. So like there's this thing called a username. Let's look at posit. Right, a posit event is bounded and it starts with 1 to 9 and it ends with 0 to 9 multiple numbers, right? These are all kind of pretty standard regular expressions, but things that you don't want to have to type out a million times, type wrong. It's really easy to type posit for a positive integer, and it's very readable. You can read that you can look back at a grok expression and go, oh, this is an integer, a string, and a date. And you look at a regular expression and you're like, oh, there's symbols here and maybe a date. So it's kind of self-documenting in that way too. And this colon name thing is basically name captures in regular expressions, right? So this says capture a positive int and call it count. And that's how we're going to populate those custom fields in the event. There's a little more you can do here with grok with type coursing and stuff, but second level grok stuff later. So let's look at examples for Apache stuff. So we'll go from standard in again, and we'll just call it type test. So there's this great pattern called combined Apache log. And if you actually expand this out, that was Jordan's terrible slide. That was a whole page of regular expression. It's not fun to write or look at. But with Grok, you just say, I have a combined Apache log. Let's do it. And I'll show you this other stuff later. So we do that, and then we have our debug output set up to show us how the event looks. So I have this script that generates tons of Apache logs. We'll take one line from it. Really, UXRVT is going to be bad like this. Okay, so let's send this line in. And let's, oh, I'm not in screen, that's terrible. Okay, so we have an event, and now we have all these fields populated that we hadn't seen before, and this is all from Grok, right? So if you go back at that combined Apache log thing, it captured an IP and called it client IP. It captured the ident, which in this case is just a dash, right? But now we have all these things, let's say, right, we have all these structured data, right? It's a lot easier to look at if you want to say, I want to see all the gets, and you type grep get. Now, what if someone had get in the URL, right? Now you just say, I want to see things with verb of get, and you're good to go, right? So let's take this and index it. So Elasticsearch, what we recommend. It works really well. Jordan talked about it yesterday. It's easy to use, and it's really easy to get started. You can say, we actually have the Elasticsearch jar in our jar. We use it for the client, but it also has the server stuff there too. So we just say, let's output to Elasticsearch, and you just use an embedded Elasticsearch. So it's all within the Logstash process. Great for debugging, probably not great for production, but let's do that. And actually, let's just so we'll generate like 500 log lines a second-ish and send them in. So this is all getting indexed in Elasticsearch right now. And how do we get data out of Elasticsearch? Logstash has a web interface that comes with it, but you probably want to use Kibana. Kibana is super easy to use. That Rashid wrote. It's amazing front end. So by default, we see the last 15 minutes of stuff, in our case, the last minute, whatever. And we have all these events in here, right? And it looks just like the Apache log line that was unparsed and impossible to do things with. But if we click it, we see that it has all these awesome fields, right? So my log generator will generate multiple stuff per IP. So let's drill in and say, I care about this guy, sure. So now I see all the requests that came from this IP. Now it's like, well, I only care about this guy calling API get. Well, I only care about get requests. So you get the idea. You can drill in. There's cool stuff here. You can do analysis. So this is the distribution of how many bytes the response is. You can set time parameters. The cool part is you don't have to use Kibana. If you have a whole existing logging dashboard, customer interface, it's just a REST API to Elasticsearch. It's really easy to use, and it's pretty well documented. But Kibana is a good canonical example for log browsing. So we have all these logs coming in, spamming my debug output. Let's say we decided that it'd be really nice to do some metrics with this, right? We want to know how many hits a second we're getting, things like that. There's this great metrics filter. Let's get back to my slides. So yeah, graph all the things, right? So we have all this data and things are split up. It seems logical we might take rates of these things, put them in Graphite or wherever you want to put them. So the metrics filter is kind of like stats-D. It looks at things going through, it looks at a rate, does things like that. So we'll say, let's make a meter called hits, and we'll put a tag on it called metrics, and do some graphite stuff. This graphite config is a master thing. So if you have the latest release, this whole fields our metrics thing isn't there, I don't think, but it's there in master. So basically, this fields our metrics is designed to deal with exactly the output of metrics. So the way the metrics filter works is it looks at all the messages that come through. It doesn't actually mutate them. It keeps a separate counter going, and every 5 seconds,
5 or 10.
yeah, I think it's configurable, right? It flushes out an extra event. So if you have 10 messages a second coming in, you have an extra event every 5 seconds with the metric tag, and we pull it in here.
Basically, you don't need stats D anymore.
Is correct.
Yeah, right.
What is the intent?
Well, the intent is that if you have stats-D running for other things, there's no reason to not use a stats-D output. But if you don't want to set up stats-D just for this, or you just want to do it quick and dirty, here you are, it's good. And it's kind of a logical thing to happen in Logstash anyway. So let's go run our thing again. Yeah, so there's stuff to think about with that, right? So like, yeah, so stats-D it'll send a 0 if it doesn't see any other hits to keep your line going. Yeah, so the metrics filter is brand new.
That's a good thing.
So right, that's configurable. It's an arguable good thing, right? For some
I
people.
want to know if there's a gap in data coming in.
I certainly do
Because it
too.
could be a problem. Like if I don't have any stats coming in for.
Right, well, there's the question of, yeah, treating gap in data versus 0 and stuff. So the metrics filter is brand new, so we're still, things like that we need to think about, and, maybe there's an option to that to always emit zeros if they're not there, right? So we called that counter back up here in our config. So we called it hits, so over here we have a variable called hits. And now I can see the 5-minute rates. Let's show the last. Right? Yeah. I know, isn't that awesome? It's like this code was tested or something. Programming works, so does science. Yeah, so this is the basic idea of it, right? I instrument at work a ton of logs that I'm still working on convincing people to convince structured, but even with structured logs, that's how I get structured logs that log numbers and info into stats-D. I do it all through Logstash. There's lots of other alternatives for that. There's like a Logster thing that parses logs, but chances are you might be running Logstash anyway to index things. You're already looking at structured logs, ship it in. And to get a little better insight into what that metric thing is doing, let's have it show us that actual metric event that we're getting. Longest 5 seconds ever. Show me metrics. Yeah, there are some embedded Elasticsearch issues sometimes.
Oh, this is your Elasticsearch server seeing probably Rashid's.
No, I changed my posting.
Yeah, but there's got to be tons of other people here.
Yeah, you just clustered with somebody.
Awesome.
See somebody else.
Yeah, I saw
I'm filling up all your hard drives now with Apache logs that are generated.
They're not data nodes.
Why is the wireless slow? Gee, I don't know. Something on port 9200. I don't know what that could be.
Change your ES cluster name now.
I think we should all join and see how big of an ES cluster we can populate.
As long as you're the data.
Sure, I can ship a couple QPS, a couple K QPS. I'm sorry, these are the, yeah, well, that's going to go well. Okay, you get the idea, right? So the metrics logs above these ridiculous stack traces that are clearly useful.
we have to go to you.
Oh my God. Look, all right, something useful.
Very easy to pause with Logstash.
Yeah.
Multi-line filter quick.
Yeah, exactly, right? Logstash your Logstash logs. But then when that doesn't
But
work.
not the same process.
No, yeah.
Feedback loop.
Yeah,
Separate
yeah,
process.
very meta. So yeah, this is a metrics packet, right? It could still look a little better with source unknown. And pro tip, there's no type on metrics packets. So if you say type equals test, nothing will happen. Ask me how I know. I was a little drunk last night, and that was very confusing for a while.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, I have a thing where I'm fixing that already. But yeah, so the metrics thing basically it puts these fields in with the prefix of the counter you set back in the config. And check out the docs in the metrics filter. There are some other cool things you can do with it. So quick, how to get started with Logstash development. If you wanted to hack on Logstash at all, it's really easy. Git clone, right? It's github.com/logstash/logstash. Can't miss it. And once you have it, we don't use bundler anymore. Yay. So there's this gembag.rb thing you can run. Yeah, but it doesn't have the word bundle in it, so it's okay. And it just gets everything installed and going. We had issues with every pull request modifying gempfile.log. Yeah, and then once you have it going, the way I've been running Logstash here, you can just run bin Logstash agent. It just behaves as if you were running the jar, right? So everything after the Logstash is the same thing you pass to the jar. Yeah, and the standard, we're happy to, any pull requests, email patches, any way you want to get code to us is awesome. And we have a lot of people that write Ruby for the first time as a Logstash module, and definitely don't be shy about, if you have an output you want to see or a feature and want to try to work on it, we'll help you get it in there and tested and working and set up, so.
Yeah, our code review process is pretty gentle.
Yeah, I mean, we check in everything. I mean, sometimes we fix it if, if someone submits a thing and it needs help and they don't fix it, we'll end up fixing it and merging it anyway, but, we want.
Validator doesn't complain, it gets merged.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Make test, ship it, let's go. Yeah, I mean, ideally you test these things too, like, it's impossible to test every out, some outputs maybe for some commercial product we don't have or can't test, so that's a whole other ball of, AMQP, bad letters. So I was hoping for this to be pretty interactive at the end. People have log formats, questions. I haven't really been looking at RC. Yeah, so we ship this jar file, which is awesome because it's all-inclusive, all-dependency, Java-jar. If you have a JVM going, you're pretty much good to go. You can still do custom plugins. There's a plugin path, right? So if you have custom Ruby filters, inputs, outputs, you can write those in Ruby. You don't have to do your own Ruby ship. I know we have a gem file now. Does it work as a gem? I don't know. Yeah, you could maybe hack it too, but I would go with the jar thing. It's really easy. Huh? No, yeah. Yeah.
The flat jar is a fix for a bug that causes really slow startup.
Yeah.
So that's why the flat jar exists. Soon there will only be one jar release. The flat jar is just experimental.
Oh, sorry, the flat jar. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So is the flat jar like kind of don't worry about that for now, or I've been playing around with it and it's slow to start. So especially, I guess that was really a question for you guys is when you're sort of iteratively playing and sort of building out your Logstash config, maybe you should have that thing set up, but it's slow to start up.
It is a little cumbersome. Every time you run bin Logstash, you have the JVM delay.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that we'd like to eventually do is have on-the-fly config reloading.
Yeah.
Just the way the inputs and outputs were structured originally and written, it's not trivial to do right now, but it's obviously something we need. Especially because restarting Logstash can get hairy when you have like metrics filters that are keeping state, multi-line filters keeping state, and it's much nicer to be able to do a clean config reload. But that's not super easy right now. The way the thing works, the way the pipeline and the inputs filters work.
For all plugins. But you should definitely feel like if Logstash is taking a long time to start up, that is a bug. You should agree it is bullshit, and we are working on fixing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's JVM overhead we can't fix, but there is other Logstash startup overhead that needs to be faster.
Yeah, like sometimes it'll take a minute to start up, and that's completely asinine, and it's a bug. But
And sometimes it's related to your inputs, filters, or outputs. So if you file a bug on that, include your config, we'll reproduce it and fix whatever that input issue is or whatever.
I think it would be handy, and I can do this for every issue.
Sure.
It just say we're going to start it when it's ready. It just says okay.
Yeah, actually.
if you set the -v flag,
Yeah.
it logs in at info level. Like, hey, we're all done. Let's go.
So
It's not by default.
the debugging, right? 1V gets you info, 2V gets you warn, and 3V gets you way too much crap because it sets Ruby $debug.
3V doesn't do anything anymore.
Oh, good. Yeah, because people would send in logs with 3V, and it's like, there's 60 megs of nothing here. I don't know what to do. And it uses cabin, so everything's all pretty with colors. Thanks, Jordan. So yeah, -V and -V can be pretty useful for debugging. And also, if you're writing inputs, filters, or outputs, like, be generous on your debug logs, right? If you're going to drop an event because you decided that it doesn't do something, right? Eventually, someone is going to have that event drop, but they didn't expect it. Put a log.debug in and make everyone's lives better.
Log what you're doing.
Yes. I mean, it is Logstash, right? So we should log things. It would be really bad if Logstash didn't log stuff. Yes?
What are the sort of best practices about making sure your Logstash stuff is running the way it's running okay? And you can monitor
Yeah. JMX, get out of here.
It's a JV now.
Oh yeah, so JMX is great.
Check it out.
Yeah, we need, in general, Logstashes, it needs a lot of, Jordan was talking about those phases of development, right? And I think like part of the phase 2 is making something operationally really useful. And we're definitely in that stage right now. Like there needs to be a lot better instrumentation of Logstash itself. Like, I have this pipeline that's going through and it's slow. Why is that? Is it my grok filter with a really crazy regular expression? Is my output to, Elasticsearch taking 5 seconds every time because my ES cluster's busted? These are things that'd be really nice to know. So for now, I'd say it really depends on your inputs and outputs, right? If you're writing to Elasticsearch, you could write a check that makes sure your Elasticsearch index is growing. So it's kind of along those lines, right?
You can also do like emit heartbeat events. That
Yeah.
go through Logstash and you time
Right,
those.
or you could emit a
It's
stats-D
not as
thing.
awesome as it should be, but
Yeah.
alright, that has to be
I'm just wondering about monitoring at the moment, like looking for side effects.
Right.
It's something.
We definitely want better direct introspection of, I want to be able to ask Logstash, what are you doing? What inputs are up and down, right?
Well, it could also be like if you use a simple like the HTTP input or TCP input, send a message through to an output.
Yeah, you can do an end-to-end
Like,
test.
Check an end-to-end.
But then you're only testing, right? So the way Logstash is working internally, right, every input and output has its own thread. And it tries to be really smart. Like if an output thread crashes, it tries to restart it and be smart. So that test is good for the base agent pipeline is going, but it doesn't test that, your Elasticsearch output is busted, but your test HTTP output is working fine, right? But those are the things,
from a file.
yeah, right. Those are the things like reading a status thing that says, oh, these threads are running, your ES thread has crashed 6 times in the last 5 minutes, and, so that's definitely stuff that we need to have in there to be operational. We tried to put metrics in once, but global locking made things horribly slow. We had to.
Really
It
short
was
implementation, and
ridiculous.
it was really slow.
Yeah, like times 10 bad.
You're welcome for that really shitty implementation.
Well, thanks for backing it out at least.
Yeah.
Other questions? Custom log file formats, logging questions.
To add on to your question about monitoring and testing, so there's a test suite in Logstash that lets you write a config file, some sample events, you make assertions about what those events should look like after the filters and whatever process on them. And you can use that exact same system to make sure that, well, I have this bullshit log format, I want to make assertions about how I'm parsing it and that it always
Yeah.
stays correct.
You could like write a unit test for your config file. In fact, we should make an easier framework to do that kind of thing. Like I do that at work for custom grok filters.
Pull up, I'll show you guys. Give me a web browser, or Logstash is fine.
Browsers.
Examples is good. So it is code, and if code scares you, I apologize. But basically, you describe your situation. You give it a sample config file, and in this case, you can give it a partial config file where you're only defining the filters. And then you say like, here's my sample event. And then what happens is it takes that sample event, runs it through all the filters, and gives you the object or the event afterwards. And then you make assertions about what is or is not in that event after on the flip side. So this is a really good way to make sure your filters are working correctly and making it provable. But I mean, it's not useful in production because you're not having the tests always run in production. But as far as like a development thing and an iterative thing, like this is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, if you want to unit test your config, this is
Yeah, this
a
is
decent
definitely
way to do
the way
that. You had a question in the blue shirt.
Oh, yeah. Bulk importing of logs to Logstash into Elasticsearch.
Good question. Yeah. Well, so an important thing, I'll do a pre-thing and then answer that question. So the date filter is really cool. So by default, if you don't have a date filter, Logstash says, well, the date of this event is when I got it, which is, generally pretty approximately right. For real-time stuff. But even with real-time stuff, depending on what your input is, there still could be lag. And a lot of times people actually care if it happened at 1 second after versus 4 seconds after. When you're trying to correlate, a bunch of logs across a bunch of services, time actually matters, right? So we have this date filter. So let's go back to that Apache log line. Oh, that got loud. So it's got this ugly-looking date format here, because why standardize on dates when we can't? Hi, Jordan. Who gave him Figlet? I'll have the cow say back at him. There's a link in the docs to how this works, but it's Joda, Java's datetime parser thing that's actually fast, unlike Ruby's things, which are Ruby strings and ridiculously slow. So you specify a date format, and ideally your data has time zones, because you're all good people, or it's in UTC. And so what this does, if you remember that event has that metadata thing called @timestamp, this parses whatever date format crazy format you have, and normalizes it into @timestamp. And that's how it gets indexed in ES, and when you go into Kibana and say, I want this date range, that's looking at @timestamp, not some arbitrary date field you've defined. So let's do this for the Apache thing. And I have it in here adding a tag called date matched, so we can see that it's actually doing something. And let's go back and run this.
It's probably worth noting if you're going to put dates in, you probably want to pass through the date filter because Monitor tries to guess what index your events are going to be in, so it searches the smallest amount of time possible, so it's going to get all this data stuff. And so we assumed that if putting your data in UTC time and passing through the date filter is the best way to go. So Logstash creates its daily instance based on UTC.
I have a debug on. Wake up. Oh, hold on. Probably turn things on. All right, so now we see that it's going to have a tag that says, so the tag is date matched, and we, I guess we didn't show that timestamp in the debug output. Oh, there it is. And the timestamp is the normalized version of the time that came in. Right, so because it's @timestamp, right, so there is this other field in here called timestamp that's a field, but that's just arbitrary text that we split up, right, exactly. That what's in there doesn't matter, except the date field, we say, look at that field and populate our real timestamp in it.
Isn't there an option to drop that in the date filter, to drop the field that parsed the timestamp?
It would be a nice, but you could do it mutate too. I mean, so one thing to consider, right, like I would not index things like this, right, because there's a cost to indexing all this stuff, right? So if I never use ident, do I need to index that ident as dash every time? Probably not. Do I need to index this bullshit timestamp I'm never going to be able to search on anyway? Definitely not. So we can drop those with mutate filters and such, but that's kind of tweaking. Once you get the base going, you'll say, okay, I index a log. When I index 10 megs of logs, it's 30 megs in Elasticsearch. Holy crap, what can I get rid of? And then you start cutting things out. So back to importing logs. It's really important to have a date filter when you import logs, because you don't want to import a year of logs and have them all timestamped in the same 10 seconds. And a good way to do that is have something like a TCP input, or right here with standard in, right? And if I wanted to import right, I can just, and if I had my Elasticsearch output on and it wasn't broken with the cluster thing, I would just be importing all these logs into ES and doing the filtering and mutating on them. And it's going to spam everything here. That's a good way to import logs.
So the importer then would be, you put a TCP and it would be JSON?
So it depends what your log format is, right? So if your log format's already JSON, you're awesome, and it's easier, right? But if your log format was regular text, it doesn't matter what it is, because it's still going to run through the Logstash config as if it were a real-time thing, right? So if you feed it in via standard in, if you have a TCP input and netcat it all there, it just it looks like a regular, it's all, again, it goes back to types and tags and everything, right? Like maybe your stuff you're importing, maybe you have an old log format and a new log format. You want to import old logs, right? You make your TCP input a different type and then run different grok filters on it or different things on it, right? So you might have to get into that kind of filtering, but it's still the same. Logstash doesn't know you're importing things. It just says, hey, I got 15,000 lines on TCP input. Great.
Could you provide, like, if you want to do sort of a bulk import of multiple applications from different log sources, could that tag or type right on the command line or something like that?
Yeah. So Jordan talked a little bit about how Logstash can talk to Logstash, right? And basically what's happening is it's taking that Logstash event data structure that we see get spit out every time and serializes it in the JSON. So if you look at, so let's go over here. Let's turn off debug on our standard out and do that. Oh, it's not going to print it in JSON. Yeah, can I have it? Can I do that? I don't know. Yeah, I can show you on IRC a little bit, but basically, like, if you make a JSON structure and you can set at timestamp, at type, at tags. If you're going to make it yourself, just be careful to get all the data structures right. Again, this is kind of goes back to like why we're redoing the Logstash event schema. It's kind of like arbitrary and we assume a lot of things. But you'll see in some Logstash configs inputs that have format JSON_event, and that's what that is, right? That means it's an event, like a Logstash event, serialized in the JSON. So yeah, you can definitely generate those yourself. So if you had 15 different app types, you just wanted to bulk import, you'd have some tool that, if they were already JSON, maybe you'd have a tool that coerced them into a JSON event, or you could just have 15 different inputs on different ports, set different types.
So if you're running Logstash shipping to Logstash, is that what you say?
So Logstash shipping to Logstash, we have some example configs probably. So yeah, like here's an example, right? This is indexer. So like this is how an input would look on. So this is like if you had a central Logstash server. So let's say you have a bunch of Logstashes on your boxes, all shipping to a Redis instance, and you had one guy reading from it. This is how that looks, right? And what's happening is the shippers have just a regular Redis output, and they're writing that JSON representation of the event. This is reading it as JSON event. So even despite this has type logs, that really doesn't mean anything, because once we parse the event JSON, it goes to its own type. That's another reason we need to fix schema stuff, because it's a little non-intuitive.
And I think there's some inputs that actually assume JSON event too.
Yeah. We want to do it's a little weird how that works right now, but once you kind of wrap your head around that and look at the input docs, it's a little better. Sure. So it all depends on. So like, let's say you have a bunch of nodes and you have a shipper on all your nodes. A lot of it is collection and where you're going, right? So if you have like 4 boxes that are doing Logstash indexers, maybe they're all running a Redis instance too, or you're using, if they're already, Jordan showed an example yesterday, right? You can have your output say, go to all these Redis boxes. It'll pick one that's up and go, and the inputs can kind of be from all of them. Other options, like if you wanted to use, if you really loved Erlang and wanted to use RabbitMQ in clustered mode because you're crazy, you could do that and use an HA, AMQP, and then you just run 5 indexers, all talk to the same guy. So Logstash itself doesn't have any kind of HA stuff, but all the inputs and plugins, it just depends what your data flow is, and you have to make your input and outputs HA, and that makes Logstash HA. And as far as Elasticsearch goes, that's trivial to scale. Kibana, just fire up 6 web instances, round robin between them. That's what we do at work. We just have a bunch of Kibana boxes and hit them with the DNS tail at round robin.
There are a lot of projects. There's a lot of different projects that are doing JSON event formatting from like native language stuff. I think there's a Ruby library for outputting your logs.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Yeah. Oh, sorry. There are some native libraries. Like there's a Ruby library, and there's I think there's
Pull up the Logstash GitHub repo because there's a couple in there, I think. Yeah, there's 2 Java ones there, so you can do it straight from log4j or logback.
If you use these kind of things, you have to. the day, we're not going to break backwards compatibility, and,
Right.
We have the semantic versioning thing, right? So if you're staying on 1.1, you're not going to suddenly break, but it's something to be aware of if you are going to generate Logstash event stuff directly from your app. Make sure you track that if you're going to upgrade Logstash, because that could change in the future, right? And we're being smart with the new event, and versioning the event thing now, like we should have in the first place. So new event schema will be awesome.
Is there a significant performance difference between just sending JSON to Logstash and sending JSON event to Logstash?
What'd you say?
The whole point of this is so that you don't have to have any filters at all.
Yeah.
So if you put, like I put Nginx in there in JSON, it's a significantly faster process by not having to pass through the
Well, so there's two things, right? There's definitely a large difference between sending in a text log and regular expressing the hell out of it. But JSON versus JSON event, it's about like not having to run the date filter. Maybe you have these, maybe you have a bunch of complex filters you would otherwise normally run to do like greps and set tags for other things. If you push that logic back to your app and say, I know this is a metrics log event, I'm just going to put tag metric on it right away, you save that filter run. So yeah, definitely, every filter you can save is one less time we have to go in thread, pass data back and forth and do stuff. So that does have a bottom line impact on your throughput for sure. But it might be premature optimization, start out with it, and if it gets slow, try it out kind of thing. Yeah. A good question. Yeah. I'm not in particular, no. Is it bad? I mean, I'm sure it's bad software. Yeah, I mean, that's a great place to write an input, right? You could write a Logstash input that could read from that shared memory directly and get it out in the format that, seems reasonable and structured. But that's a great use case for an input. I mean, in general, if you're doing things like writing a script to pull log info out and putting it to a file and having Logstash read the file, it's a good time to have an input, right? And if you can't write the input or don't want to code the input or whatever, file a bug, give us details, sample log lines, we'll hack the input together. Logstash inputs, filters, outputs are actually really, really easy to write. There's just this object that gets passed around, and you define one or two functions, and it's a pretty. If you look at the other plugins that are in there existing, you can copy a simple one, and just add things to it.
How do you tell it how to assume the year if what you're logging doesn't track the year?
I mean, if you always want to say it's this year,
Yeah.
I mean,
Like assume
I think that Joda is does the right thing.
Okay.
But like, let's say you're doing something crazy, like I have to import all these old logs that, I know what their file name, their file names have the year in them, but the year isn't in the, it's like a syslog, right? You have all these old syslogs, but 2012 isn't in them, but it's in the file name, right? You could read from file, you could run grep filters on source and set tags and set a year variable and then do that in your Joda filter.
Yeah, I'm less worried about that. I'm more worried about like just handling.
Yeah, but for today's stuff, Joda does the right thing. If you give it a March 30th, it's like, well, probably 2013 or whatever year it is.
That's the right thing.
Except when it doesn't?
During the leap day.
Yeah, don't import logs during the leap second or leap day. Yeah, we're fine.
The bug has been fixed. But,
And new Joda, is it released? In a new Joda?
in JRuby 1.7.2, the latest release, or the latest release we shipped.
Oh, it's a JRuby bug.
It was, well, Joda ships with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we're on 1.7.2 and 3 is that.
Yeah, just to respond to the last question.
Yeah.
You can build your own timestamp tag using interpolation, so you can build a new field out of the values on existing fields, where you could interpolate several variables or date parts, and then just have a little year. Cool.
Yeah, so you're saying you can interpolate existing fields and add a date to it. Whenever you want to do things like take an existing field and add things to it or add and delete fields, there's this great filter called mutate that's kind of like the generic, I'm going to do horrible things to this event that other filters don't do. So when in doubt, the mutate filter will probably have what you need. And again, if you have some crazy custom thing with that, you can, writing a filter isn't too difficult to do some kind of custom date year insertion thing or whatever. Questions, custom logs?
Is there a way to read those from Skype
Logs from
Scribe.
Scribe. Yeah, I don't think there's a plugin for it
No one's
yet.
asked for that support. No one's asked for Scribe support, so it's not implemented yet, but it shouldn't be terribly difficult.
The plugins and stuff that exist is like very organic, right? I mean, the initial plugins were like things that we needed, and the plugins that have existed is pretty much someone comes along and says, hey, I really want to put Scribe stuff in here, and we write a plugin for it. So, I mean, that would be an awesome hackathon thing, or if you just want to file a bug in our Jira, link from here, definitely feel free to at least file a bug to track it. So if someone else comes along and was like, oh, I know Scribe, I can write that input plugin, right? So, yeah, definitely. I'm sure there's I mean, really, if there's already a Ruby library for whatever you want to do, it's really easy to write the plugins, right? If you have to write the plugin to talk some kind of, API or some other thing, then you have to write that Ruby thing first and then write the plugin. But if there's already a Ruby thing to talk whatever you want to talk protocol-wise, you're pretty much good to go.
Looks like that's gonna need some love.
Well, so that's the thing, right? I mean, there are a lot of issues you can have with Logstash that are as a result of, we use this third-party gem that has this bug. I was talking to someone this morning, there's an XMPP thing where you send the Unicode character and it breaks. I mean, it's not Logstash's job to monkey patch all these things, but we definitely want to make Logstash be able to deal with that stuff, right? So that's why we try to have reasonable output restarting when an exception happens in an output thread, that kind of stuff, but...
And you can always fall over to a Java library if you...
And it's JRuby, right? So take advantage of the fact that it's JRuby. I mean, that's why our datetime parsing is actually fast. And so, I mean, yeah, chances are there's a good Java library if there's not a Ruby one. Any other oh, and one thing to not do is FFI in JRuby. That's not fun.
It's a little slow.
Yeah. It's like J and I in Java, just things you don't want to do always. Other questions? I guess JRuby actually supports FFI now because it didn't for a while.
Well, that's what the ZeroMQ plugin
Uses, yeah. Oh, that's that memory leak bug that was there for a while, where,
Well, there's actually a pure Java ZeroMQ library.
Yeah, well, when you're using FFI too, that's memory that gets allocated outside your JVM heap. So if you're doing, when you're allocating memory for Logstash with an FFI plugin, you can use more than the JVM plus XMX because you're FFIing out and calling malloc and C, and that's not under the JVM heap. So things to be aware of. Any other questions? There's a bunch of things tagged Logstash in the hackathon, and there's a jillion open Jira issues and input plugins and oh my, so much stuff. Kibana enhancements, I'm sure, I don't know. But if anyone was interested in hacking on stuff, definitely hit up Jordan, John.
I'm going to put Rashid on the spot.
Oh, I like it. Sounds like it should be like a service, RashidOnTheSpot.com.
So there's always a Logstash demo online if I can keep it up. I don't maintain it very well, but it usually stays up. So if you're looking for real actual usage of Kibana and Logstash together, this is it. And there's a new version. What's that?
Oh, this is your
This
semi-complete
is
stuff.
yeah. This is mine. No.
I'll check in my HTTP log generator thing.
This is the new version of Kibana that's coming out, right, Rashid? Yeah, it's coming soon. You're like, damn, that's a nice dashboard. So Rashid's the guy who's working on Kibana, and the new version of Kibana will let you build your own custom dashboards in the web interface, and you can save them, and it saves them to somewhere you don't have to care about, and you can share them, and it's going to be awesome. What's that? Where, here?
Yeah, that guy. Bring up the list.
Oh, man.
Oh, cool.
Big map. Sweet.
It delivered.
So yeah, like this kind of stuff is really good for people who don't need to look at raw data. Like your business people don't give a shit about what an Apache log looks like. They want to see this to see where people are signing up from. Like that is really powerful. You can drive all of that with one system, which is pretty badass.
Yeah, Kibana is awesome.
Want to show the IRC logs in Logstash?
On the demo.
Are they up some more?
Search for type IRC. Add type.
Yeah,
Come on.
IRC was an R
That was a
too.
bad decision.
So that's the Logstash channel.
Yeah, this is an IRC input. We always talk about there being lots of plugins. There's over 100 plugins now, and this is just the IRC input. and the IRC input connects to IRC, joins a couple of channels, and just emits every IRC message becomes an event with a timestamp with fields like the message and who sent it and things like that.
We need a filter that will parse your the hello Pete thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and another cool demo is like there's a Twitter input, right? So you could index stuff on Twitter if you cared about such things. And it's a good way to stress Elasticsearch too. Is just grab a Twitter feed for some stupid trending topic and
Justin Bieber.
there's right. Index all the Biebers and you will stress test the crap out of your Elasticsearch cluster.
The farmers only give you 50 events per second. So
Yeah,
it's not-
threads 12. Yeah.
I don't know why they say
That doesn't let you do.
I swear.
Well, if it doesn't, it will.
I think
Yeah.
throttle you or block you.
Yeah, I think so.
We clearly need a Tor proxy for our Twitter thing.
Yeah.
No, but yeah. For stress testing stuff like that, I mean, you can just write a log generator. You can do the import log thing where you have a corpus of just 10 megs of logs. You just, while loop netcat them in. Yeah.
What's the relationship between Kibana, Elasticsearch, and Logstash?
Okay, so Logstash is, so people ask all the time, like, oh, I have to use Elasticsearch with Logstash, right? It's just what the 90% of people do with it. So Elasticsearch is just a place that Logstash writes stuff, and Elasticsearch is, a big Lucene document store. Kibana is just something that reads from Elasticsearch, but it makes some assumptions that the data is going to look like a Logstash event. But technically, you can use Kibana on Elasticsearch that's populated by not Logstash. It's yeah, any interface. Oh yeah, so Graylog 2 is I guess there's a nice browser for that. So you can use a Graylog output if you want that kind of thing. Basically, any kind of existing log browser that you really like the interface to. If there's not already an output, we can write one and just have Logstash ship logs to that output. You're good to go.
I have something more developer-wise. Logstash and Kibana are completely separate.
Yeah, Rashid's been in Logstash for as long as I can remember, and Kimchi, the Elasticsearch guys, always hangs out there. So it's different development groups, but everyone knows each other, and we don't have problems where it's like, I can't believe the ES guy did this stupid thing and the Kibana guy didn't. It's like we're all in pound Logstash on Freenode. Any other questions? Definitely feel free to find me, Jordan, Lucis, whoever. There are a bunch of people here that have done a lot of Logstash too, so I'm sure we'll all be hanging around somewhere here. Yeah. Oh yeah, James's book is awesome. Jordan was saying it's like it needed to be out a year ago. It's so cool that it's out now. So
Yeah, and it's only like a $10 ebook, and it's not that long. I think it's like 200, 300 pages. Something
Yeah.
like that. And it gets you if you really have no idea.
get the conceptual what's happening.
It gets you going. I think better
Yeah.
than the current documentation will.
Yeah. One thing, so Logstash documentation, it's really, so the stuff on logstash.net is generally really good for reference. Like, oh, I want to use this filter. What is the name of that parameter? It's a great reference. It's not so good for, gee, Logstash, how do I do stuff with it? So there's this cookbook with an awesome setup. And the cookbook needs more love and more stuff. So, if you do something cool with Logstash, no matter how trivial it seems, if you think anyone else ever might want to see that, submit a cookbook. Just a pull request to a different repo, or just email the list and say, here's my config and here's stuff I did, and someone make a cookbook out of it for you. A cookbook's a good place to go just to get an idea of what are people doing with Logstash, what are cool.
It's really the Apache JSON one, because I talked about that yesterday.
Yeah, so you can have Apache dump out, so this is that JSON event format we were talking about. So Apache dumps out JSON event format straight out. It's a little scary. We're building
It's
JSON
definitely too
with
close
string
to the
replacement.
FTP, but it does work.
I'm pretty sure there's something you can do to put something in here that'll make JSON unhappy, but
I was just wondering about that for Nginx.
yeah,
Somebody published one for
Yeah.
Nginx based on this.
I think I've got one somewhere.
yeah. Is it on the?
So what happens if I put a double quote in my server?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's JSON issues with this. Yeah.
Oh, so with respect to Apache, Apache will do its best to escape things in a way that doesn't fuck up the event as far as Apache's concerned when it logs it. So it won't log weird ass ANSI control characters, and it tries to escape things that it knows are not printable. And I think it might.
But it's JSON, so there's probably some caveat
So
where you put a.
If Logstash reads something and expects this format and it fails, it falls back to plain text. It's like I tried to parse this as JSON, it failed. It's mostly JSON, but Logstash will treat it as plain text at that point.
And you can also call them some program, so you can actually do filtering and then ask your patch to be messy.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have lots of options.
Besides what's in the cookbook, are there any tips about using Windows logs?
There's been some discussion on the mailing list about it in the past. Using Windows event logs was the question. Yeah.
I mean, like, does it work? Is there anything that people say do or don't do that?
It should work, and it does work when it's not crashing. There's a bug right now where
It works when it's not crashing.
I know, caveat, huh? In the current release, something about the library that is used to access the Windows event log doesn't work the way Logstash has it packaged. So it tries to load and then crashes because it can't find some DLL, which is a bug, and we'll fix it. But like in general, it should
But
work.
it's binary, it's either going to work or it's not going to work.
Yes. With most bugs in Logstash, it's either going to crash immediately on startup or a minute after startup because startup takes too long. And that's a bug. But it usually won't like mess up your data in flight. We try to be a little bit defensive in implementing Logstash in a way that even if stuff messes up, it'll retry or it'll give
Whether it's third-party libraries, bad input,
Yeah.
we try to be resilient to. You don't want to wake up one morning and be like, oh, someone put a Unicode character in their login name and my Logstash is all stopped. That'd be bad. If there's a Unicode bug, I'd rather just skip that line and keep going.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we do. Cool, I think we're up on time, but feel free to find us and ask us lots of logging questions. Awesome, thanks guys for coming and using Logstash.